So you had you played 37 games in 5 years.
Yeah.
You're taken as the number one pick, essentially to fill the boots of Nick Riewoldt on the way out. You're coming in.
Yeah.
And it didn't work. But in amongst all that, you've had the thing that you were in danger of being defined by, and that was the concussions.
Yeah. It's probably the big, it's interesting. I look back on my time with the Saints, and probably the one thing that overrides any of it is my concussions. And that's obviously because I had a fair few of them, which is fair.
8?
8 of them, yeah. And the last one being pretty significant. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I look back on it now, and it is a blur, to be honest. Like a lot of my time at the St Kilda, especially with that last year I had in 2019, because it was just so difficult and really hard to sort of navigate my way through that. And with everyone like you were around when I was going through that stuff, and it was difficult. But I think, yeah, it's given me a lot of stuff that I've learnt from it. I think that's the most important thing. I look back on my time with St Kilda, and I met so many great people, and I learned a lot in footy. But I think probably more importantly, I learned a lot about life too. Yeah, sort of the ups and downs and how to get through stuff. And I've said to a lot of people in some weird, random way, that was a really tough time for me. But if I could go back and change any of it, I wouldn't, because I think it's given me this sort of perspective on life that I don't think I would have had otherwise. Yeah.
Why didn't you stop? Why didn't you stop playing?
Yeah, that's a good question.
At the end of that.
Yeah,
2019.
It's such a good question. A lot of people always say that to me. Even now, people say to me, why are you playing still? And firstly on a medical basis, the reason I had the confidence to go back and give another go was because I sat down. So with the AFL, they have this sort of concussion panel system they run for people who are sort of in that bracket of potentially career-ending injuries. And I don't think it's just for concussion, it's for anything. It could be knee or whatever, they get this panel of sort of experts together, and you sort of sit down and you get I guess comments from all the specialists you've seen, all the people you've seen. They put sort of a document together, and then that's given to these people. They sort of go through your past and sort of the things you're going through that time. So that was 2019 when I was sort of struggling a bit. And on the back of that panel, they sort of said to me, look, you've got a way to go to get back, but if you're sort of really diligent with your rehab, which I had been, this was in November of 2019, so I'd been to Chicago, I'd done all that stuff, and I'd come back and been doing a lot of work, and they said that if you keep at it, keep on, you'll be able to get back to normal, baseline, and with that, the next part is probably the most important part, they said that there's going to be no sort of increased risk of concussion to, say, anyone else who's playing. And obviously, we play a contact sport, so there's always going to be risks associated, but that risk for me wasn't going to be greater than, say, my brother Tom or anyone playing.
Hard to get clubs to believe you.
Oh,
I remember at that time you were so dogmatic, and I'm no different to anyone else, and even I'm sitting there going, well, you are.
Yeah.
But your clubs weren't really believing it.
That was the hardest part. I think, because I sort of look back now and I'm I was probably a bit naive. I was the docs are saying I'm fine, but...
They were too scared to take a punt.
Definitely. They were, for sure. And that's why, I owe a lot to the Swans, for giving me an opportunity. But that was probably a challenge that I didn't really think about. I was just and I'm glad I didn't, to be honest, because the biggest thing I needed probably at the end of 2019 when I was struggling was just something to to strive for, kind of have a goal.
Yeah.
Because that whole year I was just absolutely nowhere. I was struggling. I was probably a bit depressed. And then, to sort of come out of that meeting and go, all right, I want to play again. And then with that, I hadn't exercised for 10 months, I was sort of, nowhere really. So it gave me something to do, something to get up each day for. And that was great. That sort of set me back on the path.
Who gave you that hope? Was that just the hope that from the medico saying that you get back to a baseline?
Yeah. That was probably the main thing from a footy perspective, was them saying that. If they had said to me then, look, mate, we think you're at a greater risk, well, then I would have just said, no, I'm done. Footy's important to me, but it's not as important to me as, never going back to what happened at that time.
So it's really important, because still, as you say, to this day, people go, what's he doing? People say to me, why is he playing? But so from a medical point of view, you had absolute faith in what they were saying to you, that you could get back and play.
That was the only reason I said I would come back. Because, as I said, me and Lewis went into that meeting, and I said to her, I'm if they say to me that I'm at a greater risk and that there's a 1% chance that if I play again I could get back to this, I'm going to pull the pin.
Yeah. So the Saints, through that year, they've been by your side through this, and they've the doctors have seen the concussions one after another, and understandably they're gun shy.
Yeah, definitely.
And so you go to them and say, well, I've now been given this lifeline, if you like, a footy lifeline.
Yeah.
What's your attitude to it? What did they say?
Well, they sort of put a few things in place. They sort of said to me, so this was 2020, so this was the COVID year. So on top of that, chucked a few spanners in the works. But the plan was going to be that I'd come back to the Saints. I'd sort of reintroduce myself to training, like contact training. Yeah, all the facilities.
Not on the list?
Not on the list. So I agreed with them that I'd go off the list, and I got paid, but I'd go off the list so they could have a list spot to come, which was fine. I was more than happy to do that.
So they wanted to use the list spot?
Yep, list spot. And then they sort of said at the end of that year, if you can tick a few boxes and we're sort of happy where everything sits, we'll have a look at it and see what happens. So,
did they give you a guarantee?
No guarantees, no. And then so that was like 2020. So I sort of started going in January, February, doing a bit of stuff, and then COVID hit. So COVID hit, and then the season sort of stopped. From that point on, from Feb 2020, I never went back to the Saints. That was basically it.
So 2021, there's COVID still around.
Yeah, so that was probably the first time where I was kind of like, it might not happen, because I was always, and it's probably just that naive feature that I've got.
You had an unbelievable belief. I will say this: you had an unbelievable belief in your ability to get back and play. You never wavered.
No, I didn't waver. I didn't.
Well, you always said you were good enough to go and play.
I didn't waver, which is probably what helped me, I guess. Some other people might have just gone and stuff it, but I didn't waver from it because I knew that I could get back. But the part that was, the hardest part was that probably the first time with the Saints, especially where they're like, nah. And then I caught up with a few other clubs and they were like, probably the part that was hard was that they were like, look, from a footy perspective, we're happy with it, but it's more the head stuff that we're like, nah.
So they weren't going to take it.
No, absolutely not. So then I was kind of like, oh shit, I might have stuffed it here. But then I sort of, through December, I just sort of chilled a bit and I was just like, all right, I'll just see what happens. And then the Swans called and said, look, do you want to come up? Tommy's up there and just play in the VFL. But there was never any guarantees around AFL stuff. It was more just come up, get a bit of love back for the game, which I probably needed, to be honest.
So you went up, live with Tom?
No, I just lived by myself, actually. I just lived in Coogee. Tom was, so in Sydney, they've got a housing program, so the first, second, third years all live together. So Tom was with Logue McDonald and Dill Stevens, who were just like epic characters. So I spent a lot of time with them, but went up there. They sort of said, look, we want you to have early on run around in the back line. I had to do a few things for the AFL, so I had to tick off this sort of like 6 to 8 week program that the AFL gave to the Swans. And, the Swans probably, I went up there and the Swans were like, look, we'll give you a go in the twos and just have a run around. But I don't think they probably knew fully what they were getting themselves into. I think I probably didn't either, to be honest. Like I had to do all this stuff for the AFL, do this like specific training program, all this contact stuff.
For the concussion.
Yep, and then had to send it all back to the AFL, all the docs at the Swans. Charlie Gardner, the footy manager, had to tick all this stuff off, send it back to the AFL. The AFL had to tick it off. They had to be happy that I'd sort of done everything.
Just to let you play the VFL.
Just let me train the VFL, yeah.
Train.
And even train and then play. So I did all that, I got back, and then I played the first sort of 6 weeks in the VFL and 3 or 4 weeks in the VFL, and they sort of said to me from the start, we want you to have a go just in the back line. Like I'd never played in the back line before, ever. Like I had no idea really. Tom was playing down there and I think they loved how Tommy was going. So like, we'll give you a run down there. I think more just around the fact that I'd play a bit deep and just have everything in front of me. So, I don't have to run back in the packs and do dumb stuff like that, which had been my sort of problem in the past. So, went down there and I really enjoyed it. Like I probably just found a love for footy again. I got back into it and there's a great group of young guys at the Swans and some of the older guys too that I was playing with and absolutely loved it. So got into that, and just sort of got back into the game. That was the first time I'd played that was this time, like April last year, first time for 2 years that I'd played. So